So let's talk about slut-shaming and whorephobia. First of all, what is slut-shaming and whorephobia?
Well, whorephobia is the hatred and contempt of sex workers. It's informed by patriarchy, misogyny, and rape culture. Whorephobia impacts sex workers because it directly targets sex workers and their livelihoods, which then impacts the culture at large and leads to slut-shaming of non-sex workers in the general population. These attitudes deem sex workers as a public nuisance, spreaders of disease, offenders against decency, or unskilled victims who don't know what is best for them and need to be rescued.
And slut-shaming is a practice of policing people, especially women and girls who are perceived to violate the social expectations of sex and sexuality with behaviors like and appearances like. Slut-shaming goes hand in hand with whorephobia, as both act as forms of social control to discourage non-men from feeling autonomous, affirmed in their sexuality, and shifting from subject to object. Ultimately, slut-shaming confirms the idea that hoes, i.e. sex workers, are bad. This impact on non-sex workers demonstrates just how deep-rooted patriarchal attitudes are. All this to say, the patriarchy wants control over bodies to uphold the idealization of purity.
Now, some other examples of whorephobia would be the criminalization of sex work, legislation that targets income made through online platforms, and the social isolation that comes with being labeled as a slut. Additionally, both explicit and implicit whorephobia can be found in various parts of our culture, including the use of whore and hoe. The only people who ought to be using these words are sex workers. Think of them similar to other derogatory words that are being reclaimed by the people occupying the identity that they are trying to degrade.
And slut-shaming can be seen in various places as well, like revenge porn. Like, let's say a boyfriend and girlfriend record themselves having sex and keep the recordings on their phones. But when they break up, the boyfriend shares the video and calls her a slut. Both people contributed in the creation of this material, but the boyfriend weaponizes it and distributes it with the intention to harm her because he is aware of the social implications.
Even talking about body count is an example of whorephobia, and usually centers cis-het, PIV, penis and vagina sex, upholding the idea that the more penetrative sex you've had, the less value you hold in the eyes of the patriarchy. Remember, you are not less valuable for having more penetrative partners than those around you, and there is no proper number of partners.
Let's talk about other harmful impacts this has on non-men.
Double standards that impact women are like men and boys being praised and getting power for dominating women, whereas women get labeled as fast, loose, and easy. These words can have a huge impact on a woman's mental health.
Yes, the mental health aspect can be so detrimental. This culture of whorephobia and slut-shaming contributes to people experiencing depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, and some people have even died by suicide.
So your prejudices and misogyny not only harm someone's social acceptance, their right to safety and protection, but also the often overlooked effect on emotional and mental well-being of all those impacted by the system, and ultimately leads to the unnecessary deaths of young women. Now let's talk about how you can shift the culture.
Well, let's start with the obvious. Watch your language and unpack your own misogyny, including internalized. This can look like excusing men for their actions with the boys will be boys rhetoric and victim blaming. Let's also not judge others for their sexual preferences or their sexual autonomy.
To do your part in shifting the culture, start noticing what beliefs and values you have around how people ought to behave based on their gender. Notice who taught you those values and who around you upholds those beliefs. Notice how those values and beliefs have impacted you and your decision-making around sex, relationships, and your body.
Now, of course, there's much more, and you need to do the work to check your whorephobia and slut-shaming. The first step is doing what we've outlined here by noticing when you're upholding patriarchal ideals, and not only by checking yourself and your friends, but by checking out the following.